and here's part 5. I talk about my time after the military, my time backpacking Asia, and my conversion. So during my time in the Army, I used to visit my cousin and we go hunting and stuff on leave. And he suggested that when I get out of the Army that I go backpacking. And when I first thought of Europe, and he said, nah, you can do that like when you're retired or something. You know, he's like, go to Asia. That's where you'll see like interesting stuff. He's like, this is the only opportunity you'll probably have in your life to do this, man. He's like, just go to like Asia. And don't worry, you know, it's really cheap over there. And so I started looking through like travel blogs, travel videos, stuff like that. And I found this is a very well-trodden backpacker trail. You know, it goes back to like the hippie era, decades ago, like 70 years ago or something. And Europeans used to go to like Istanbul, and from there they go overland through Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and apparently in the mountains of Afghanistan there's naturally growing marijuana. So the hippies, I'm sure a good amount of them love that, but others just went for like the culture and stuff. They go through Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and someone from there would go home. Someone would go from there all the way out to Bangkok. And so like, South Asia, Southeast Asia, it's a pretty well-trodden tourist backpacker trail. There's a lot of tourism there still today. And so I was like, oh, actually this looks like a good idea. And so I planned my trip, Thailand, China, Vietnam. I also wound up going to Cambodia and Laos and back to Thailand again. And a couple of experiences I had that were quite influential on me. After I got over some of the vacation-y stuff, my initial week or two, I started getting more into like the food and culture and Buddhism and history of this region. So when it came to religion, I didn't have any academic background in how to study religion. Since then, I've been studying, but at the moment, the only experience I had was growing up, grade school, high school, and then the military, and then here I am. So I thought about it. I was like, well, when it comes to learning, from my experience in the Army, if I wanted to learn a vehicle or weapon, I always wanted to learn hands-on to really, if I need to learn a vehicle, I need to open it up, I need to pop the hood, learn the basic mechanics of this, preventive maintenance and how to drive and operate this vehicle. If I'm learning a weapon, I need to take it apart, put it together, learn how to clean it and fire it, take it to the range, fire some rounds through it. So I applied the same concept to religion. And I was like, okay, well, if I want to learn religion, I might as well learn hands-on, right? And so I just kind of just jump in. And so, especially when I went to northern Thailand, I met some Thai people. I started really I really wanted to see not just the tourist perspective. I wanted to go past that and see the local perspective of how they live, how they, do Buddhism, right? And I remember I also, I met 2 other backpackers, and we rented some motorbikes and rode up this mountain, which is really popular. And there's a bunch of there's this big temple complex up there. And interestingly enough, one of the guys I was with, a German, and he says, I saw him meditate for a bit, and so he had a little more experience than me out there. And then after that, he came up to me. He was like, man, he's like, this Buddhism thing is basically just it's overrated. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, man. He's like, I don't really like Buddhism that much, man. He's like, really. To him, is the monks are kind of corrupt, basically. And he said there's too many donation boxes. He kind of criticized it. And I was like, okay, there's negatives everywhere, but personally, I still want to see it for myself and then make my own decision. But I understand, okay, every religion is going to have, in terms of its implementation, you're going to find some kind of problems with what people are doing, But I thought that was kind of interesting. He was really disinterested, just kind of detested it almost in a sense, but. He still was interested in visiting the temple and stuff. And So I visited some other Thai people after that, and visited all these different temples and museums and stuff like that. And I remember at a museum, interestingly enough, I was reading some stories about, like, Buddha or whatever, and there's a story of his enlightenment in one part of this story, and it says, he's sitting under this tree trying to achieve nirvana, all that, and as he's nearing his enlightenment, it said that there was all these things that came to try and distract him away from it, and one of them, it said, was actually Satan had come to him to try and distract him. And I was like, whoa, they believe in Satan? I was like very surprised, seeing these kind of links. That I'd always had this idea in my head that, the world's religions are super, like, disconnected and just a bunch of folk, folk tale kind of inventions, in a way. But as I traveled through Asia and I explored Buddhism, I started to see more connections between world religions, right? And in Islam, we believe that every religion, going back far enough in its history, will be rooted in prophethood. At some point in the history of every religion, there was a prophet sent, and over the centuries and millennia, these religions were changed as humans started adding their own things and adding and subtracting until you get what you have today, basically. So to me, when I started seeing these Abrahamic parallels, like that idea of Satan, right? That to me was, like, very surprising, very eye-opening. So then I went into China, and in Western China in particular, I went north because I really wanted to see Tibetan culture. And there's these Amdo Tibetans in, like, northern Sichuan province. And there's a village called Langmusa. And it's quite interesting. There's these two big monasteries, and they're called Gomtas. And in the middle of the village is a mosque. And that was very surprising to me. I was like, oh, wow, to see this, like, centuries old, coexistence of Buddhists and Muslims going back hundreds and hundreds of years was quite, eye-opening to me. Because before this, you always have this idea that, Muslims are, like, intolerant or something, and they, hate everyone or something like that. But especially in China, as I travel through various provinces of China and meeting all these, like, mostly Hui Muslims, I mean, they're very nice people, and they're very integrated into Chinese society. And that was a very eye-opening experience for me. And so I went to, one of these gomtas, one of these monasteries, and there's a lot of pilgrims there. So pilgrims will, in Tibetan Buddhism, so there's different types of Buddhism, by the way. There's Theravada, which you'll find in Thailand. There's Mahayana, which you'll find in Vietnam. And then there's Tibetan Buddhism, which you'll find in, like, China. And so in Tibetan Buddhism, which is quite a bit different than my experience in Thailand, you'll have these, like, pilgrimage sites. And so pilgrims will make pilgrimages to these sites seeking, like, good deeds, like karma, like good karma for their next life, right? And so they do all these, like, rituals and acts of worship. And for me, I was like, okay, I'll just jump in and join them. And when I do that too, I notice you quickly earn respect from the locals when you respect them, and you don't think you're high and mighty and above people in a sense, right? So that's another secondary effect. But for me, I really just wanted to, like, personally just kind of experience religion. And so I walk up to this temple, and there's people circumambulating this temple, and their hands are like prayer beads, and they're reciting these mantras. And so I walk in, I just kind of, like, walk up to one guy, he's an older man, and kind of just started following him. And he handed me, like, some prayer beads and put them in, like, my right hand, and had, like, a water bottle in my hand, and he just, like, went and put it down, like, it's okay, you can put your water bottle here, it's gonna be safe here. And then I think he gave me, like, a mantra to recite. And then I was, like, walking with him, behind him, around this temple several times. And he goes to the front of the temple. There's a couple other people there, and they put their hands in, like, a prayer fashion, and they put their hands to their forehead, their mouth, their heart, and they prostrate, like, tons and tons of times. all these prostrations, and I started joining in with them and stuff like that. And he didn't speak English. I don't speak any Tibetan or Chinese or anything, so everything was kind of caricatures of him demonstrating things, like where you're putting your hands. Like he pointed at his forehead, then he pointed at his mouth and opened his mouth, and then he pointed at his heart. And then interestingly, I look at this temple afterwards, and there's there's a lot of iconography around like Buddhist temples typically, and be it a Tibetan Buddhist temple or Thailand or Cambodia or wherever, you typically find a lot of like paintings and stuff like that. Vietnam may be a bit different, if I recall. I didn't visit a whole lot of temples in Vietnam though, but at least in Thailand and Cambodia and Laos and China, you find a lot of iconography, statues and pictures. And one picture I found was very peculiar. It had the cycle of samsara, the cycle of life and death, and I remember seeing distinctly on one end I saw heaven, and it went down through other stages of life, then it went into hell, and came on to other stages and back up to heaven. And I was like, oh, heaven and hell, like, so they believe in heaven and hell as well. So like there's Satan, there's heaven, there's hell. There's so many parallels with Abrahamic religion. That was, again, very eye-opening to me. Like, I always thought the world's religions were so disconnected, but in reality, if you really study them, especially study the early roots of religion, but if you really study the world religions, you'll find a lot of similarities and connections, actually. Some other experiences I had there in Lang Musa, wonderful halal food from these Hui Muslims. I went to this particular restaurant that's very memorable, and I got like a yak burger and an apple pie. That was one of the best meals I've ever had in my life. Very popular restaurant apparently during like the high tourist season. And I remember I ordered this apple pie, and I was like, I could hear the guy in the back like chopping apples, and I was like, wow, this is gonna be like really fresh. He came out and gave me this like handmade like apple pie. Sort of like the one I hate to bring this up, sort of like the one you'd get like McDonald's or whatever, like a rectangular shape. This is like straight up like from scratch. I was like, whoa. And that was the best apple pie I've ever had in my life. So yeah, that was very memorable. And he was very nice. He was very hospitable. One thing too is that from those Afghan interpreters in the army, I remember the taslim, the Muslim greeting, Assalamu alaikum. And so I'd see Muslims wearing like a hat. It's very popular in China that the Muslim men will wear like an Islamic looking hat, so you can very easily identify them. And so I gave him like, oh, Assalamu alaikum. And I had a beard too growing. When people get out of the military, they typically grow a beard because it's like the first time you can really like, because in high school, not a lot of people can like grow beards. And then you're in the military for a couple of years, and by the end of it, you actually can grow a beard. So this is like the first time in your life you can like try a beard on. So a lot of people will grow out their beards after the military. And so the guy, he may have thought I was Muslim, and this is a common experience I'd have. I'd be like, Assalamu alaikum. They'd be like, oh, alaikum assalam. I'd be like, they try to be like, oh, are you Muslim? I'd be like, no, I'm not Muslim. I just know the greeting and stuff. And then they get confused. They'd be like, Assalamu alaikum. I'd be like, alaikum assalam. They'd be like, wait, are you Muslim? I'd be like, no. And then they would just get confused, and like, some of them would be like, maybe thought that I still was Muslim. Some would be like, oh, maybe he isn't. I don't know. But either way, like they still had just great respect for everybody, and they're such hospitable people. And my experiences with people of Tibet and the Hui Muslims was very positive. Another thing too was I remember I walked up like a hill, and I saw a bunch of people together like carrying like big rocks and like up this little hill to lay a foundation for like a building. And I think they're like smashing the rocks or something at the top. I don't remember. And so I went up and I just started carrying rocks with them, and kind of jumped in, right? And then after like maybe half an hour or something, I remember this guy came up with a man, and he was like leading, like an old man. He was leading him by his hand. And then and so a lot of Chinese people can't grow like big beards, right? And so this guy walks up and like he's looking around, and he sees me, and he's like surprised. He walks up to me and like tugs on my beard, and he goes, oh, and then he shakes my hand. I was like, okay. He really liked my beard for some reason. Uh, but yeah, it was a very positive experience. It's a very beautiful city. If you ever have a chance to visit, definitely take that opportunity. This isn't like super related, but I also went on a nice trek with a Tibetan guide who you can see in this picture here. And these photos are my own. And I just remember the wilderness out there was just so like breathtaking. I mean, just mountains as far as you can see, as far as the eye can see, you know. Super fresh air, yak farmers and stuff. Very memorable and very beautiful, pensive. And I remember once we were crossing like a ravine, and like he goes down with his horse and crosses over, and then turns around and looks at me, and then I come down with my horse, and my horse goes and kind of like sniffs the water, and then it steps in, and this ravine is very like small. It's only like 2-3 feet wide or something. It steps in. I guess it's a little bit deeper than he thought or something, and the horse like trips and just like face plants right into the ground, and almost got bucked off. And I was like, oh man. And then my guy just like burst out laughing and was like, like, oh man. He's like, okay. And I kind of hurt my wrist a bit, but I was, nothing was like, no injuries really. And I was like, man, thank God. There's like hours of horse riding away from even like the village. It'd be a horrible place to like break a bone, Yeah, alhamdulillah. Very beautiful experience. And this is I think in like April, but towards like closer to like the summer, all this will turn green, and it's even more breathtaking if you ever have the opportunity. It's not expensive at all, but there's like a 2-day horse trek. Another city in northern China was Siahe, and there's a monastery called Labrang Monastery. It's this huge monastery. It's like a whole kilometer walking around it. And again, pilgrims come here. It's probably one of the biggest pilgrimage sites in the region. And there's all these prayer wheels on the side and like a whole bunch of different temples as you go around. This picture is one of those temples. And then on the right, you'll see some of those prayer wheels. People walk by and spin the prayer wheels, and they believe like you spin the prayer wheel, you're getting good deeds by basically like saying the prayers that are written on the prayer wheel. And I remember a couple of things. One was I actually met a monk there who could speak English, which is like, I guess like every tourist's dream kind of, to like meet a Tibetan monk who can speak good English. And he was like American, I think he was like American born or something. And he was kind of young. He was like in his 20s or something like that. And he was like oddly, casual about everything. And I was like, whoa, tell me about Buddhism, And he was like, I was like, he told me like the 8 Noble Truths ever, and he was like, yeah, and he was like, where are you from? I was like, I'm American. He's like, okay. He's like, you're a Christian? Your parents are Christian? I was like, yeah. He's like, okay. He's like, then you should stay Christian. And I was like, oh, really? I was like, I didn't expect you to say anything like that. It's like come all the way across the other side of the world to explore Buddhism, and the guy just tells you, stay Christian. Kind of anticlimactic, right? And I was like, oh, like really? He's like, yeah. He's like, I think your parents would be kind of upset. He's like, if you became Buddhist or something, I'd be like, I was like, I think mom's kind of casual about it, but I don't know. And he was like, okay, but like, and he told me about the noble like eightfold path, which is like, even you can look it up. It's like basic stuff, right knowledge and avoiding like vice and stuff like that. Like generally good advice, really honestly. And then he showed me like this temple and told me about some of like the artifacts inside it. He's like this thing. He's like, they say this is like the eye of Buddha and these other things. And he was like, yeah. He seemed kind of like slightly disinterested about it. And I was just like, okay, maybe am I like too excited or something? like, I don't know. And then. And afterwards, he's like, all right, well, we're about to do some chanting together. So he's like, I'll see you around. I was like, okay. And he sat down and they'd like chant these things, whatever. These like hymns. And I continued walking through this monastery. And there's like, I don't know, probably hundreds of pilgrims there, honestly. And as I go around, I noticed a lot of elderly people, and it's quite impressive. I remember at the very end of it, there's like a couple of like big prayer wheels. And I come out, and I spin the last prayer wheels, and I come out and I see this like maybe 60, 70-year-old woman, and she's wearing a rice bag as clothing. Well, like over her clothing, sorry. And she's doing the hands to the head, the mouth, the heart thing, and prostrating, and then she takes a step forward and does it again and again and again. And I was like, wow. I realized she did that for like the whole kilometer around this whole complex. Like she's been there like all day, like prostrating around this whole complex. I was like, wow. Like that lady has like serious discipline. Yeah, that was very impressive to me. I may have had a picture somewhere of her actually, but I don't think I can find it. So that was Siaha, quite an interesting monastery there. Now, as I traveled through China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, one thing I noticed in a lot of Buddhism was the endless statues of all kinds of like bodhisattvas and different like, you know, demigod-like figures and stuff like that. And over time, it just became kind of like a dizzying just array of like all these different, you know, things. And these statues always felt this kind of, you know, flatness to it, you know. It always just seemed kind of, I wasn't going anywhere. You know, it'll say this one's about wisdom, this one's about, you know, this and that, and, you know, this statue is yada yada. What was kind of interesting, though, were the statues of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. And he had different poses, and some of his poses meant like, you know, different things. Like his hand is, you know, he's in a meditation position, his hand's down, pointing at the earth, and he's like, you know, drawing energy from the earth or something. And others, he's walking with his hand up and is like stopping violence, and, you know, different poses of statues and stuff. But generally, a lot of these statues just felt kind of, especially as you travel around and you start seeing like so many statues, you know. It's just like, it just seems kind of excessive, and it just seems like it's just going nowhere, you know, in that regard. Another thing too is like in Cambodia, I found paintings of like the story of like Rama, like these Hindu epics and stuff, and the sides of like Buddhist temples. As like another reminder of Buddhism's roots in like ancient Hinduism. What's interesting too is that these, you know, demigod-like figures of like Hindu epics, like Rama and stuff, a lot of times they actually have like blue skin, and I was wondering about that, like why the blue skin? You know, it's kind of peculiar. It turns out actually that the reason is because in the scriptures themselves, like the Gita and stuff, it actually describes them as being black, and because Hindu society in India, and, you know, it's various other influences it's had in like Southeast Asia and so on, it's kind of like racist in a sense. It's a bit too complicated to really go into detail, but it goes back to the caste society of India, basically. And the idea that such a, you know, holy figure to them, you know, this human demigod thing, or like even just full-blown deity, the idea that they are like black is kind of unfathomable to them. And so they, instead of making them just blatantly like white, which goes kind of against their scriptures, instead they just made them blue. And of course they take on very, you know, certain other features, you know, like the shape of their faces and so on, which is reminiscent of like, you know, kind of like a whiteness in a sense. That was actually very interesting to me, and I learned about that. The blueness always just kind of just went over my head, and then finally I learned that this is like essentially like a form of like kind of like racism. So then I went back to Thailand, and in northeastern Thailand, I really wanted to visit northeastern Thailand. So I visited central Thailand, northern Thailand, but Isan province in northeastern Thailand. It takes on a very unique Thai Lao culture. As a particular experience I had, which is very interesting. Actually, I had two that were very interesting. One was up on the border. There's like this very famous park, and it has a bunch of like carved statues and like a bunch of like interesting stories, and like there's like one roundabout of like the progress of a person's life from childhood to adulthood. But and then in this park, there's like a little building, and at the top of the building, there's a palm reader. And so I saw him, and I was like, hey, let's give it a shot. I don't think I've done that before. And he looks at my palm, and he tells me some things. One thing he tells me is like, if you want good luck, then go to the market and buy like, he asked me like what day I was born on, what day of the week or whatever. And he was like, and buy like, I don't know, 15 nail fish, and you go throw them in the river and free them, and then they will like, pray for you or something. And I was like, okay. And he looked at my palm, and he was like, if you get your PhD, he's like, you'll be, and he was like, the President of the United States. And I just looked at him, and I was like, yeah, I don't believe you. I was like, that's come on. you just telling me like something fantastic. I felt like, just to make me, I don't know, say something good about you. I don't know. I was like, okay. And he looked at me like, you could see my disbelief, I think, on my face. And he was like, he just kind of looked down, and he was like, all right, whatever, I walked away, and I was like, yeah, that was a giant waste of time. It's interesting with, with Islam, so palm reading, that, most of that type of stuff is just a bunch of lies and fabrications, really, and that you shouldn't believe in it. And then and this is a very key moment in my life, then I went to, there's a city called Gon Ken in Isan province. I met some Thai folks there, and we went out and visited a forest monk out in the woods. There's various forest monks out in the woods in like Isan and probably other parts of Thailand. And so they kind of isolate themselves to further detach themselves from this world and help themselves in like their meditation and stuff to try and like achieve nirvana. And so we visit this forest monk, and he says like a lot of interesting stories and stuff, basically. He said a lot of it in Thai and had to wait for someone to like translate it for me. But there's a couple of interesting things that he said. One of them was that he said there was like a spirit in the woods there, and that, would like come to him and stuff. And he called it like Pudam, which means like the black uncle. And he said that one day he had this spirit come to him when he was sleeping and gave him a dream that there's like money inside of like an old urn. So he has like a bunch of like really old artifacts there in this temple, and so he went and he opened up this like like a jar, not an urn. He goes and opens up this old jar, and he found like a bunch of really old Thai money in there. And he showed it to us. It was quite interesting. And then he gave me a picture of this Pudam, like a statue of what he said. He said it's like this person, or I don't know, representation of it or something. And just like an onyx, like, dude sitting on a chair, And he told me, he's like, if you ever want success with anything, then pray to Pudam, and he will help you. And I was just like, okay. I had great respect for him, though, for like being way out in the woods there and devoting himself with such discipline to what he's doing. And then after that, I came back home, and I came back to America, and I moved out to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I was working a new job, and then I thought about what he said, and I was looking through like my photos and stuff. And I looked at that photo of Pudam. He said like, oh, if you want success, then pray to Pudam. And I was like, well, you might as well give it a shot. And like, I prayed it once, and it was a prayer that I could just felt
like it just fell flat, right dead in the water, like right from the beginning. And it just felt like a waste of energy to do sort of thing. And then I thought about it, and I was like, this Pudam, spirit of the woods out in, outside Gonken in Isan province of Thailand and the other side of the world. So it's way over there, and it's like, he's telling me to pray to this thing on the other side of the world. And I thought, like, well, why not just pray to God? Like, this thing is geographically limited to like a part of the world, and here I'm way over here, and yet, God transcends like location. He can help anybody anywhere, right? And I was like, I concluded, I thought about it, and I concluded, I was like, when it comes to Buddha, all these other, like, what we'd call as created beings, when it comes to all these other things, Buddha and Pudam and, and Jesus, and it comes to all these other things, it's like, why would I not just pray directly to God? God is greater than all of these other things, all these other people, all these other entities and things. And who is greater than God? No one. So I concluded that the only one worth praying to is God alone. And I never prayed to anything ever again. And inshallah, I pray that I never do ever pray to anything other than God again. And such a conclusion like that may seem very obvious to like a Muslim. We have, the Quran is very clear about these types of like theological beliefs. But for someone who doesn't have that scripture and that direct education, and all you have is just the world and life around you and all these, trying to explore different religions and going through, life, to come to a conclusion like that, it's just not easy. Alhamdulillah, and Allah guided me to that conclusion. And when all you have is like your intellect, and a little bit of scripture here and there from different religions, and looking at different people and how they, worship and do different things and so on, to finally reach that conclusion is something that's not small, and it's something that is definitely not easy to come to. But alhamdulillah, this is probably one of the most significant moments of my spiritual journey. So then I came back to America and I moved to Fort Worth, and I started looking around for like a church or somewhere to go to, right? And I actually visited a Buddhist temple in Dallas. I met some folks there and visited like another meditation center and stuff like that. But I kind of want to get back into Christianity, and get back into God, because the thing about Buddhism is it was missing the God component, and to me that always just was the most important thing that I always kept coming back to. Occasionally I would go out and like in Asia, experiment with other things, but in the end I always just kept coming back to God. I wanted to go to God, right? And so I started going to different churches. I tried like a Catholic church and in different places, and for some reason there's something kind of missing in every church I went to. I went to a Catholic church, and there wasn't like I didn't have like a very good feel of community about it. The service was all right, but I didn't feel any sense of like brotherhood. Then I tried, my friends. Like Baptist church, and it had a good sense of community, but the service was kind of odd. I wasn't really used to that, like music playing and stuff like that, and they barely even like touched the Bible. Like the whole hour or so was for the Sunday Mass, and I was like, well, I really like scripture. I want to get into the scripture. I was kind of looking around, and nothing really fit. It was like, it was like the Buddhist temple, not really my thing. The churches all just seemed like they're kind of missing something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But I kept going back to this church. There's a couple of things about it that helped, I think, guide me to Islam, actually.
So for one, the pastor on one Sunday Mass, he said that we should be praying every day. Don't just pray when you're in need. But he said you should have a regular prayer schedule every day. Something regimented. So that way, when you do have a need, you already have that structure of prayer set up, and you're already connected with God rather than just kind of desperately trying to establish a connection. And the first thing I thought of, I was like, oh yeah, Muslims pray like every day, That's just reminded me of that. And then there was some kind of like evening class this guy was trying to set up for like younger folks, and I was like, okay, I'll go come by. One thing he said in that class was like, he was talking about like, he talked a bit about mental health a bit, and then he talked about how all you need is like Jesus, and Jesus will kind of solve all your problems, and it just seemed kind of lacking in nuance a bit. And then one thing he said was, he's like, so don't follow that guy Muhammad, follow Jesus. And then and when he said that in particular, it was very off-putting to me, because I was like, well, like I'm already like in church, like you don't need to say that. Like I'm already here. Like why are you even bringing that up? And when I heard that type of stuff too, this kind of like anti-Muslim rhetoric, like why are people so afraid of Islam and Muslims? It's one thing that started kind of bothering me. And every time I started to hear this stuff, I'd also read it on, if I go online, looked up the news or something, and I'd read about stuff, people writing, and the news and so on, just seeing kind of like hateful stuff about Muslims. And I just thought back about those Jordanian soldiers, the Afghan interpreters, the Iraqis that I met, and all these different, the Hui Chinese and the Muslims in Thailand that I met, and so on. And I just thought like, it's just so distasteful. And it just seems so ignorant to be like just hating on Islam and stuff. Like these people, I was like, have you guys even met Muslims in your life? Have you ever, taken the time to go and like sit with these people or spend a day with them, or learn about them or learn about their culture, or just talk to them? Like a lot of them are very honorable people. So to me, it just felt so wrong, to just hear all this vitriol, and then I read an article about ISIS, actually, that pretty famous article in the Atlantic about ISIS. And one thing it said was that Muslims believe in Jesus, and I was like, whoa, I didn't even know that. I didn't know anything about Islam, actually, like as a religion, but I just knew Muslims, though. And the Muslims I had met were just excellent people. A lot of them had beautiful character, very hospitable, very welcoming, very kind. And over time, I was like, well, there's no way now at this point, there's no way these people are like wicked, like the way they're portrayed is like the most wicked devils on earth or something, and it's like, well, I've been all over the world and I've never met a Muslim who's actually like the way people are describing them. And so I started getting kind of like frustrated a little bit, like at the ignorance that I was like, I couldn't get away from, once I got back. This is back in around 2014, 2015, right? And still ISIS is like all over the news and stuff like that, I'm sure. And there's no shortage of media about Muslims are evil or whatever. And so for me, it was like, man, I can't even get away from this stuff. So I was like, maybe I should just go educate myself about Islam, and that way, I can go visit a mosque and learn a bit, and then I can come back and try to teach others that like, hey, no, like you're wrong. Muslims aren't like that, and that way I can at least like defend them when they're not present to defend themselves. And that was like all my plan was, but I didn't know there were mosques in DFW though. I just knew that I wanted to like visit a mosque and like learn some basic stuff, and that way I could like refute some of the vitriol. And I felt like I had like a responsibility to like defend all these Muslims I've met in my life, kind of defend their honor a bit, like no, you can't say that. And so I was working a side job as valet, and there's a lot of different people who work, all these different rotating shifts and stuff. So you don't necessarily like know everyone. And then I was standing there once, like you kind of stand in line sometimes waiting for the next car. And I look to my left, a guy walks up, and he has a Muslim name. I was like, oh, are you Muslim? And he was like, yeah. I was like, oh, cool, okay. And another guy walks up, and he's also like, his name's Muhammad. And I was like, oh, you Muslim too? He was like, yeah, we're brothers. I was like, oh, cool, okay. I was like, cool. Like, yeah, like I wanted to learn like some Arabic and stuff. And they were like, oh yeah, you can learn that at our mosque. And I was like, oh, there's a mosque here? And they were like, yeah, it's on this street and so on. I was like, whoa. I was like, really? Like yeah, pull your phone. You can, if you're interested, you can look it up. I was like, yeah, I looked it up. And I like saved it to my map. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll look it up. I'll check it out. And then I was like, man, finally, like, I was very excited. I was like, finally, there's a mosque. Like, everyone speaks English there, you know, like, my first time I can actually learn about Islam. I was like really excited about that. And so I went on the website, and there's like Sunday classes. So like, I called up. I was like, hey, are you guys open, you know, for these Sunday classes or whatever? And they're like, yeah. I was like, is it okay that I join in? They're like, yeah, you come whenever, you know. I was like, okay. So I just kind of popped in at Sunday, and I sat through all like these classes. And the first one was Imam Mujahid, and I know him now, you know, more personally. And he gave like some lecture. I think it was about like the story of like a prophet. I don't remember what he said exactly. And then after that was a Quran class. And I remember the prophetic story was very nice. It was very like agreeable. I was like, oh, there's good lessons there. And then the next class is a Quran class, and this one like really gripped my attention, got my attention even stronger. And so the guy comes in, and he pulls up the Quran on a projector, and he goes to his passage, and on the left side is the original Arabic, on the right is the translation. And I just absolutely loved that it went back to the original language. It felt more academic. Like, it's not like you know, he's just jumping up on the podium, like speaking his feelings, you know, and like what he thinks that the Quran means and so on. It was a little more academic. Like, it goes back to the you know, exegesis. It goes back to the original language and so on. And he like translated some of the Arabic for us. The Arabic is so rich, and it just like that just completely blew my mind. And at this point, I was like, whoa, like this is like nothing what I thought it was. I thought this was something completely different. This is my first time I actually saw it from the inside out. Because one thing with me is like I always wanted to see things for myself. Like I may hear negative things about XYZ, but I want to go and see XYZ for myself and make my own decision. I don't want to just let other people tell me what to think. Like, I want to go and form my own opinions. Be it about anything, politics, religion, whatever. Like, I want to form my own personal opinions and not just think that whatever I'm being fed are now magically my opinions too, you know. Like, I want to go see for myself, right? From the inside out. And so that just completely changed my mind. I was like, whoa, this religion is nothing like what I thought it was. I still had a lot of misconceptions about it up to that point. But I knew that Muslims were decent people, but I just didn't know anything really about the religion itself. And once I actually saw it from the inside out, I was like, whoa, like this is not at all what I thought it was. I thought it was just something completely different. And I was like, is there like a Quran or something I can read? And they're like, they gave me one in English, and like I think like one or two other like basic books about stuff like how to pray or whatever and stuff like that. And this guy, the Syrian guy, and I still know him. He's a wonderful guy. He's actually, ironically, he turns out to be the father of those two guys, my two coworkers. I didn't even know that until like months later. I was like, whoa, like he's your dad. I didn't even know that. and he didn't know I met his sons either, I don't think. Like, it was just a coincidence. And he walked up to me and he was talking to me a bit and telling me some basic things like, this is what we're doing, this is what's going on right now, and stuff like that. And he was like, so like this book is nice, and it'll show you how to like pray and make the wudu, the ablution and all that, but he's like, mainly though, like if you really want to learn, like read the Quran. And he's like, and know that you're not reading the original Arabic, you're reading someone's best attempt at translating the Arabic. This isn't the actual Quran, but it's someone's attempt at translating it. And I was like, okay, cool. And then they get gathered for a prayer, and I was like, awesome, man, this is cool. This is my first time I actually like got to see Muslims pray. Like, I saw mosques, I saw Muslims,
but I had never up to that point actually seen Muslims pray. I had heard the adhan before in Iraq, but I had no idea what it ever actually meant. Like, I had like probably some, negative assumptions about what it meant, but although it was very beautiful, and I actually miss hearing the adhan, quite a bit. But the first time I saw them gather and pray, and I was like, hey, can I like join in? And they were like, yeah, sure, just try to like imitate what we're doing. And I was like, okay. And I like stand in this line, and now they make the takbirat ihram. They start the prayer, and I'm standing there in their prayer, and then they bow down. I bow down. I was like, this is good. I like this. I'm worshiping God. This is exactly like, it reminds me that before that I had learned how to prostrate in the Catholic Church at that confirmation, those confirmation classes, and then I had seen a lot of prostration in Asia. They have different styles of it in Thailand and Vietnam and the Tibetan Buddhism, and but it's all like different forms of prostration, and I did participate in it with a lot of people. And finally, this is like my first time experiencing like the Islamic prostration. And then we stand up, and then we go down and prostrate. And I went down, and I was like, "This is it right here." And then I think someone had told me what some things to say in English, and like "Glory to God Most High," "Glory to God the Great," and stuff like that. And "Oh God, forgive me," and these things. And I was like, "This is it right here. Like this is what I've been looking for." And I was just like, after the prayer and everything, and they ended with "Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you." After the prayer, I was like, man, that was unlike anything I've ever seen. And then I came back, and there was like a Thursday, iftar, like dinner type of thing, and I was sitting, meeting people and sitting with people and talking about Islam and religion and stuff like that, and talking about my experiences in Asia and talking with people, and it was just a wonder. The whole thing was just a wonderful experience with a wonderful community, really great people. And I was like, this is like the perfect blend of everything I've been looking for. Like, they have wonderful sense of community, wonderful sense of brotherhood. The discipline of the prayer is just so awesome. And then standing in ranks, and then they fast. Talking about disciplining the yourself a bit, withholding your tongue and things like that. And it's like, man, this is like, Islam is like the perfect transition from the military, actually. The sense of brotherhood, the discipline, the standing in ranks, the prayer, and all these things is like, Islam is a perfect transition for a veteran. And shortly after that, I had known somebody from earlier who was Muslim, and he had converted to Islam as well, like a couple years before me. And I like messaged him, and I was like, hey, can you teach me a bit of basic stuff, like how to pray and stuff? And he was like, yeah. And we met up at a mosque, and then he showed me like how to do the washing, how to pray, and what the adhan is, and all these different basic things. He explained to me chapter 112 of the Quran, Surat al-Ikhlas, which goes over like basic Islamic theology, like what we believe about God. God is one. He is the one whom all things depend on, but he depends on no one. He does not beget, he is not begotten, and there's nothing like him. And he explained it to me with these nice like similitudes and stuff. He was like, imagine, he said, like, imagine a horse. And I was like, okay. And he was like, then open your eyes. He's like, what do you see? And I explained like a horse. And he's like, no, imagine a unicorn. He's like, no, open your eyes. He's like, is that real? And I was like, no, a unicorn isn't real. He's like, but you could put it together by putting things you know of together, right? I was like, yeah. He's like, but it's not real, right? I was like, yeah, okay. And he said, now imagine like a hairy troll with pink fur, blue claws, and imagine this. He's like, now this is completely not real, but you can still put it together from other things you're familiar with, right? Like bears and things like that, horns and these basic concepts like, yeah. And he's like, now close your eyes. And he was like, imagine God, right? And it's like, what do you see? And God has no form, right? And he explained these things. God has no form. You can't like imagine like what he looks like. We don't know what he looks like, right? He doesn't have like a human, body or anything like that. And so he explained these basic things to me. And then by the end of our meeting, he asked me, he was like, do you believe that Allah is one? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, all right. He's like, do you believe the Prophet Muhammad is his messenger? I thought about it, and I was like, well, I don't know much about him, but so far, I like everything I've heard, so I suppose, yeah, if this is what he brought, then, well, I believe in it. And he was like, well, you're already a Muslim then. He's like, you basically just took the Shahada. And I was like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, you just got to, start, take the Shahada and start, that's what you believe. And I was like, oh, all right then. And I texted the Imam to this first mosque I'd been to. And he told me, come by on Friday at 1 p.m., or like 1:15 p.m. And I was like, okay. And I didn't know, I think I remember there was vaguely that there's some kind of congregational prayer, but I don't think I had seen it yet. I don't remember. And I expected it to be like a typical, what we call the Dhuhr prayer, midday prayer. Maybe like 10 people there, But no, it's Friday prayer, so there's like 300 people. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was hoping it'd be like kind of like a small, gathering. I didn't know that. But I was like, that's all right though. And I go up and they're like, okay, we have a Shahada today, and I'm like, okay. I go up and he's like, repeat after me, and it's like, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, and I repeated it. And then everyone was like, Allahu Akbar. And then afterwards, like the congregation got up and like almost everybody in the whole congregation came up to shake my hand, one person at a time. And one guy came and shook my hand. He was like, hey, I'm actually from Wisconsin, but and I'm only visiting, and I'll probably never be back again. He's like, but welcome. He's like, it's the best decision of your life. And he gave me some like good words and stuff. And he was like, it's wonderful to see you make such a commitment. And and it said some good things or whatever. And every person was like, shook my hand, gave me a hug, stuff like that. And afterwards, began my time of studying and learning and trying to dive deeper and deeper into this religion and explore its vastness. And I owe my cousin my gratitude for inviting me out here to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So he lives in the area, and he's the reason I moved out here. And ever since, I've made a lot of friends, and it's been one of the best decisions of my life is to move out here. And so I definitely owe him plenty of gratitude for being, that means to my, coming here. So alhamdulillah. And something else that I think is worth sharing is that my grandma passed away about a year ago, and about a year or two before that, I had visited her, and she told me, I saw your dad in a dream. And I said, oh really? Like, that sounds good. And she said, he was waving at me from a garden. And I was like, oh wow, that's a very good dream. And then about a year or two after that, she suddenly passed away. And it was quite unexpected. I expected her to outlive my grandpa because she seemed to be in better health than him. But, Qadr Allah, as they say, decree of God. And I realized after she passed away that this dream, perhaps meant that my dad had made it into the garden and that my grandma would be the next to join him. So it's like a bushra, like a good news, from God, that for both of them, not just for him, but also for her. And, that she'd be the next to join him, right? And this is a very good sign for me as well, because I didn't know my dad that well. And I'm not, I don't know his relationship with God, and the only way to really know about that is through like a true dream, right? And so a true dream like that, it gives me a lot of hope, right? And it opened my mind quite a bit more to the possibility of people who, haven't clearly received the message entering heaven. And as my friends say, have a good opinion of your Lord. And this helps a lot. That dream helps a lot with having that good opinion of your Lord, and how he will, and what the afterlife of people will be, what their fate will be, of people who at least perhaps try to pursue a godly life in whatever way they knew best. So this is very helpful with that. So briefly, I'd just like to touch on a couple of misconceptions about Islam. In reality, this is worth its own video, though. One of them is American history, that Muslims are like a super recent arrival or something. But the reality is that a lot of the slaves that were brought over from Africa, a lot of them are Muslim. About a sixth, some sources say. They're like a minority within a minority, and they had a very hard time maintaining their religion, given the brutal conditions that they experienced. The Spaniards and Portuguese also took Muslim slaves to other parts of the Americas. There are some Muslim names in the roster, and like soldier rosters, like under George Washington, from the American Revolution as well. So we do know that there were some Muslims who fought for America in the American Revolutionary War as well. And in every other war after that, there were some Muslims who participated, though they are a small minority, but they definitely were there. And they didn't really have like any kind of strong established community yet, but they were definitely there. Another common misconception, the idea that Muslims don't coexist with anyone else or something like that, or that they don't get along with other religions. This is just complete nonsense. As you can see on the map, the Muslim world is very diverse, and it extends far beyond this map. At least what you can see in this map, it extends to every country, every continent, really, just about. And with regards to its coexistence, a lot of Muslim countries are very mixed, even to today. Malaysia, Lebanon. Lebanon is like almost half Christian. There's been Muslims living there for almost 1,400 years, and it's still like half Christian. So, Syria has a very large non-Muslim population. Iraq had a large Jewish population. Iran too. Morocco had a large Jewish population. In Morocco, even to this day, there's still several thousand Jews living there. All the Jews of the Arab world have moved to Israel, but in Morocco, they still have rabbinic law courts actually in their first line, like civil law courts, which actually indicates that Jews have more rights in Morocco than they have in America. They can full on, just about full on implement rabbinic law, and live rabbinic law in Morocco, which is quite impressive. Morocco also holds the longest standing treaty in U.S. history with the United States, and they're the first country in history to recognize the United States as an independent country. So the world is very complex. It's definitely worth studying. Islamic history. Pick up a book on Islamic history; it'll really open your mind about it. It's very diverse. It's very deep. It's very interesting, and you'll notice that it's actually very integrated. Where Islam spread, rather. A lot of it spread through trade. A lot of people think it spread just entirely through like conquest or something. Quite a bit of it spread through trade, actually. Like, for example, Southeast Asia, China. People just kind of moved, immigrated. People, landed at certain port cities, and they, built small immigrant communities, kind of, and they built like mosques and stuff like that, and just integrated with the society. And over the centuries, people started, looking into their religion, and then they would convert, and then over time people just started converting. Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, for example, and Java, has a history of some major saints, what they call the Wali Songo, like the 9 Sufi saints of Java, who converted a large part of Java to Islam through their preaching and through a lot of other work they did, improving like the culture. And the society used to be kind of brutal, and they kind of civilized people through their work. They gave people better names. They used to have kind of rough names, and they gave them better names, and taught people to control their anger, and people used to have these really, like almost kind of like our modern style nightlife, a lot of like alcoholic debauchery, and they kind of civilize it they came in and they removed the alcohol, and they removed the, vice and extramarital stuff going on, and they replaced it with, they come together and they'd hold, like, as you could call, like a party, like a gathering, and they take out all the vice and they place it with better things. So instead of drinking alcohol, they'll drink water, milk, stuff like that. They still have food, it's all halal food, properly slaughtered meat. At the end, instead of debauchery, they would finish with a prayer, and people who wanted to transcend the vices of their culture would prefer to come to these types of gatherings, and they did a number of other things like this. And this is how Islam spread in Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country in the world today, actually. Has the largest population of Muslims of any single country in the world is in Indonesia. A lot of people think of the Arab world, but Arab world is only about 15% of the Muslim world. It's a small percentage of the vastness of the Muslim world, which extends from to Russia and the Turkic regions, Persia, Africa, extends throughout the whole world. Europe, Eastern Europe, and also Western Europe, it's gaining a lot of speed in the West now. So the idea that Islam doesn't coexist with anybody, yada yada. I mean, the numbers themselves just don't even agree with that. I mean, if you go to India today, it's still majority Hindu after like 3-4 centuries of Muslim rule. So it's just, and you won't find that anywhere like in European history either. Where Western Christianity went, it kind of pushed out everything else. Whereas where Islam went, oftentimes you still see the society, even to today, over 1,000 years later, even to today, you still see the societies to be very diverse, very mixed, and they've been living that way for many, many, many centuries. And you don't find anything comparable to that in European history. Spain was Muslim for a while; they got wiped out in genocide. Sicily was Muslim for a while; they were wiped out in a genocide. A number of other examples: Bulgaria, even Switzerland had a bit of a small Muslim population, but that was also wiped out. So, of anything in reality, it's Europe, it's Western Europe in particular, that was very intolerant, and this is part of what led to, the Reformation and especially the Enlightenment era, which became very radical about separation of church and state in European history. And people, in the Enlightenment era, of Europe is when you really saw a push for what they called tolerance, because it just didn't exist in European history before that. It was just very black and white to them. And the rest of the world, though, isn't like that at all. I think as Westerners, we tend to project our own history and our own, perhaps even like insecurities onto others. And oftentimes it's just very inaccurate. Another misconception is like the idea of like assimilation, that Muslims don't assimilate into American or like Western European culture and society. And and it's kind of strange to me, like what exactly that even means. Like, how would you define assimilation? The Muslims I know here, they have jobs, they buy houses, they drive cars, but women drive, they do normal things just like other women. I don't know, like, how are they not assimilated? I don't really see how they aren't assimilated. They go to college, they study, they work, they get married. I don't know, like what isn't assimilated? I don't really see where there isn't assimilation. So I don't know where this idea comes from. So people ask me that, like, do you think Muslims are assimilating to American culture? I'm like, where aren't they assimilating? I don't really see where they aren't. Do you expect them to start picking up drugs and alcohol and visiting hookers on the weekend? Because, in terms of that aspect, a lot of them are resisting that aspect, of the local culture in some regards. But regards to like all the normal stuff, they do normal things. They go to parks. They, take their kids to slide down the slide, and I don't know. Like where aren't they assimilating? I don't see the non-assimilation. All I see is assimilation. And when it comes to especially the second generation, like immigrants, like the children of the immigrants, in particular,
And then again, too, I mean, there's also the African American community and the other convert community as well, which is as American as apple pie. I mean, we're people like me, and about 20,000 people a year apparently are converting to Islam in America, which is quite significant. So, like, I mean, people don't even think of us at all. But anyways, when it comes to like the second generation of immigrants, there's actually a worry that people are assimilating like so fast that they're just going to completely like absorb American culture to the point where they like just forget about their own religion, and not even pray or fast or anything like that anymore. And it's like, so like the worry is that they're assimilating so fast that there's like no remnant of even their own religion left, and they're just becoming like secularized, almost like atheists. Another misconception is like a treatment of women. Again, like this idea that women don't do anything but sit at home or something. And it's like, I haven't seen this anywhere. I have yet to really see this. Women are very, very active in their society. Here in DFW, there's thousands and thousands of Muslim women, and they're all like doing totally normal stuff. So like, I don't know where people get these ideas from, but they're definitely not getting them from, hanging out with actual Muslims. Another misconception is like jihad, and that the Muslims are a bunch of like violent people or something. And again, like, this is just part of the problem with the news is it can give you certain biases, like the availability bias, which is where what you see most often you assume to be everywhere. Like if you see a lot of like truck fires on the news, then you'll assume that truck fires are like a really common occurrence, but they're really not. It's very, or like plane crashes. It's like you may see like a plane crash on the news, and now you think that plane crashes are like a super dangerous common occurrence, but again, it's very rare. As the availability bias and other biases, just in the media, and so people will just see things in the news and they assume that they generalize everybody as being like what they saw in the news, and it's just not true. The average Muslim, their concern is just like the same concerns as yours. They're worried about where their kids going to go to college. Are they going to stay away from drugs and dumb things? Are their kids going to get good jobs? Are they going to experience racism? Are they going to experience harassment? Are they going to, get married one day? And, stuff like that. It's just perfectly normal. People who worry about perfectly normal things. And so like a lot of these conceptions really can just be squashed by simply visiting Muslims and hanging out with them for like a day or two and just seeing how normal they are, really. And with these endless, misconceptions, one of them is that, a lot of Muslim women cover their hair and they dress differently and they're like oppressed or something. And it's like, well, covering the hair has a long history, just in human history in general. Men wear turbans in a lot of parts of the world. Women also, cover their hair in American history. A lot of these pictures are from the 1920s. It's just normal women's clothing and fashion to cover their hair with different things. Throughout a lot of American history, Western history, European history. On the right are nuns. They've been covering their hair since like the beginning of Christianity. There's nothing like taboo about it. Go outside in the winter, and a lot of people are covering their heads. In Canada and America and everywhere else in the world, it's kind of an odd thing to be like picking out. And if you're interested, there's some quite beautiful books you can read to get a sort of introduction into Islam. I'd say the first book that I'd recommend is The Road to Mecca by Muhammad Asad. This book is one of the greatest books I've ever read in my life. It's an autobiography of this Austrian journalist who converted to Islam, and he explored the Muslim world in the early 1900s, 1920s and 30s, and fascinating book. It's a real page turner. Once you pick it up, it's hard to put it down until you finish it because it's so very exciting. So that's a must read for everybody. I think it's one of the greatest biographies of all the autobiographies and biographies in human history. I think this is by far like even one of the top 10 or even like top 5 like of all. Another great one is Hearts Turned by Michael Sujic. It's a bunch of very beautiful stories of people turn their lives around. It's very inspirational. It's very beautiful. Another one is Lost Islamic History by Firas al-Khatib. Right now he's a lecturer in Chicago at Dar al-Qasim, and he's a history major, and he wrote this beautiful book about Islamic history that goes over the whole, from beginning to today, and the rise and fall of the Muslim world, and you learn quite a bit about it. Another really good one is The Case for Islamo-Christian Civilization. This one covers recent Islamic history. It's really like a history book, kind of. And if you're wondering why how the political situation in the Muslim world kind of devolved into what it is today, this book is very informative for Muslims and people of other faiths to learn from alike. And from this is a number of other wonderful books to read. There's so many, more than I could possibly even cover in one little short section. Another good one is Sultan of the Hearts, which is a biography of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And of course, after that is also reading a translation of the Quran itself. And there's a number of different translations. Oxford has a good one. But pretty much any more recent publication within the past 5-10 years is probably a worthy read of a translation of the Quran. All right, and that's all that I got for you. So thanks for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilaik.